Ladies and gentlemen, I know we're a little bit tired and things did not go the way we planned, but at the end of the day, we work with what we have and try to make the best out of it. Now we're moving, as I aforementioned, we're moving to the next and last panel for today at AFEX 2024, and it is about digitalization in Africa, and also the rising voice in Africa, the role of digitalization and storytelling, basically. We know how media works in Africa. We know how and what importance digitalization has been having in African countries, from Nigeria to North African countries, the West African countries, even South Africa. Of course, we are not very early to the party, as other European countries would be, the party of digitalization and its involvement in politics and its involvement in the day-to-day affair in our countries. Please allow me to invite to the stage Abdullahi, my colleague. We work together at TRT World. He's a journalist and program editor at TRT World. Please, a round of applause. Next, I would like to invite another colleague of mine, Ms. Sharon, who is also a journalist and a program editor at TRT World. Please, a round of applause as she makes her way to the stage. And finally, I'd like to invite Salim Saidy, not Slim Shady, Salim Saidy. He is a journalist. He's the Director of Strategic Communications and Marketing at African Youth Architects. Please, a round of applause as he comes to the stage. Okay, thank you for your patience. It's been a long one. Okay, to kickstart things, of course, as I did, I would allow them to introduce themselves briefly, then we would get to the questions as soon as possible. I'll start with Mr. Abdullahi.
My name is Abdullahi Abubakar Kaka. I'm the program editor for Africa Matters and Money Talks in TRT. I listen to what the entrepreneurs have been saying. This is my field. This is what we always do. We listen to entrepreneurs and then interpret what they say to the markets and to the audience out there. And then I discuss Africa topics with the Africa Matters program. Probably most of you have watched it. So I'm the program editor of that show, of that program. And I'm happy to be here. And I hope we'll have a wonderful discussion about digitalization in Africa.
Thank you very much. Africa Matters is one of the I think, pioneer Africa-related programs at TRT World channel. You can watch it, you can tune in on YouTube or live. It is 100% Africa, and it aims to tell the story of Africa as is. We have journalists on the ground who are always giving us live feed that we air in an international broadcast like TRT World. Ms. Sharon?
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today to talk about digitalization in Africa. My name is Sharon Ogunleye, and I work with TRT World as well. Abdullahi is my colleague as well. I work in the news department. I have been for the last 6 years and a half. I moved to Turkey in 2018. I work as a program editor where we broadcast. Think of it as the way CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera is. This is TRT World. We broadcast news across the world 24 hours.
Thank you very much. Mr. Salim.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Salim. I am the Director of Strategic Communication and Marketing at Young African Architects. It's an organization that's working towards promoting education in Africa and, of course, promoting entrepreneurship among African youths. And at the same time, I'm also a PhD scholar at Ibn Khaldun University. I am glad to be here and to be in this panel with amazing journalists here.
Thank you very much for gracing our program today. So I'll move quickly to the first question. So we spoke about digitalization, and we know it's a pretty big deal in Africa right now because every other person, not only Africa actually, the whole world, we're getting more and more access to information like never before. But the continent of Africa is a special case, reason being its stories are now being told in a different way. We don't follow only legacy media that we are all acclimatized to. So how do you think digitalization has changed the balance of power in Africa, how people perceive the power through the digitalization of media?
I can go first. Yeah, so things have changed dramatically because before now, a lot of people consume their news on TV, on radio, but now the young folks, they are on social media. And back in Africa, everyone, if I ask you all here, everyone probably has an Instagram account, TikTok, X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Everyone is on social media these days, and people are consuming their news differently, which is forcing news organizations to change the way they transmit information to their audiences worldwide. They can't just rely on traditional forms anymore. And it's also forcing them to take a different look about the report stories out of that region. Because most times we see negative stories like conflict, and bad news, basically. But now they are also paying attention to other aspects, other emerging industries, innovative things that are happening. It's not only poverty that exists in Africa. So many things are also happening in that continent. And this is where digitalization has come in. It's changed the narrative. People are now using tools to be able to access this information. In fact, a lot of people don't even trust the legacy media anymore. We can see it from the recent elections, with US elections, and how Elon Musk played a role, with X and transformed everything. So that's it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you want to go?
Okay, I totally agree with her. Having been someone who started from print media and transitioned to digital media, I have seen how digitalization transformed media in Africa. When I started as a senior reporter and editor of Today newspaper in the Gambia, at the time, our international stories were heavily shaped by international media because we heavily relied on international news organizations like AFP or Reuters or AP because everything that we are going to cover internationally, we rely on them because whatever they say, because they have the reach within Africa. Of course, even our neighboring country, Senegal, Gambia and Senegal share a border. But even if we are going to report something on Senegal, we have to rely on those news agencies or even on Focus on Africa to see what is happening there. But today, when you look at digitalization, has brought a huge transformation. When I transitioned back in 2013, I joined Gambia's first online TV channel. At the time, in 2013, we had only one TV channel in the Gambia, which was a state broadcaster TV channel. So the online TV channel was the first TV channel. At the time, we were just broadcasting on Facebook and YouTube. But if you talk about AFEX TV now, everyone would say they are famous because of Gambia's 2016 political impasse. I don't know whether some of you are aware of it. When we had election in 2016, the current president conceded defeat, and a week later refused to concede because he said that there were irregularities in election. But everyone saw how the power of digitalization, how AFEX TV was able to broadcast what is happening on the ground via Facebook and, of course, on YouTube, that everyone around the world were seeing what was happening in the country. And, of course, at the time, media heavyweights like Al Jazeera and BBC, they had to collaborate with Africa TV to be able to use the footages of Africa TV to broadcast for their audiences. And that was a very big transformation for media landscape, not only in Gambia, but of course in other parts of Africa. Of course, 2013, we are already late to venture into that area, but I think it changed the trajectory in in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdullahi.
So I'll take a different approach. From an era where you turn on the TV at 4 p.m. to listen to the news, and then it goes off at 10. I don't know if people remember that. I'm from Nigeria, so at 4 p.m., NTA turns in, and then you hear the national anthem, and then you listen to the news, and then at 10 p.m. it goes off, and then there's all the black and white stuff. Those days are good old days where we could have only one source of information that comes in that you know it's actually genuine and it's true. But right now with the digitalization, anybody can come on TV, can come on TikTok, can come on Facebook and just spew whatever information they want to say, be it true or not true, and then everybody consumes it that way. So digitalization has a negative and also a positive way, a positive impact on people. So for me, I try to be skeptical. I try to look at it from both ways, not just, okay, digitalization is good. It's not all good. Now we have AI, we have ChatGPT, we have content image creations where somebody can make a face of me and my voice and then create a story about me while I'm not even there. So in that aspect, digitalization is not actually good for Africa, simply because things can go uncontrolled, right? However, we give thanks to also digitalization simply because we get the news fast now. The fast pace of news, we get it very quickly. So in that digitalization to African people or to Africa in general, it gives the positive and the negative side. So what I would urge everyone to do is to take both sides and then decide for themselves. Don't just consume the news and just take it as face value. So take the news, take the report, take whatever you find from the internet. We saw different fake news during the elections, especially Nigeria election. We see videos that happen somewhere in Sudan, and they come and say it's in Nigeria, or they take a video from somewhere else and just put it and say it's in Nigeria. So we have to be careful when it comes to digital content in how we consume it. So that's what I'm trying to push here. Digitalization is not entirely good, but it's not entirely bad. Nonetheless, we should take a pinch of salt and use our head to think if something is actually accurate or not.
Thank you very much for that. Actually, each and every one of them have made very valuable points, speaking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of digitalization in Africa. Mm-hmm. As they have mentioned, it's something that's still very new. It's still at its cradle stage, and it has every tendency of being misused, misrepresented. And if it falls into the wrong hand, we've seen what kind of havoc it could wreak in Africa. Speaking of which, we're gradually moving away from legacy media in Africa, not only in Africa, in most parts of the world. We are gradually moving from them. We've seen what have been happening in the past few days and weeks in the world. However, misinformation is one that I think we need to speak about and tackle, because now we have more journalists who don't want to be just traditional journalists. They also want to be involved in digital journalism, because that's where journalism is heading towards. The more you're known on the social media platforms, like you said, TikTok, Twitter, many people have huge presence on TikTok, on Twitter, on Instagram as journalists, in comparison with those who are legacy journalists on the television screen. So, how can journalists, one, tackle this newfound issue of misinformation? Because back in the day, like you said, whatever we see on NTA or whichever national channel we have, or maybe on the news channel or on the newspaper, we take it
face value.
Exactly. So we have a new issue, misinformation. How do we tackle, as journalists, would you suggest this should be tackled? And also, like you said, how would you tackle that the people who are consuming this information are able to verify what they see on the internet? Would like to go?
Okay, for the first question, how would journalists tackle such issues? There are trainings available for journalists to be able to use certain tools, fact-checking tools. If, for instance, there's breaking news, let's say out of Pakistan, there's been a bomb blast, and there's no available footage on any of the agencies because we subscribe to some agencies like AFP, Reuters, AP, and there's no footage. But on social media, there's footage that's been shared by ordinary citizens who witnessed the incident. So there are tools that they can use to check, to verify the video, to be sure that you don't go and broadcast something that happened in a completely different country on a totally different date. So journalists that work for legacy media need to be careful when they receive such media, to be sure that it's gone through the right process. And where I work, we do have a team, we have a social media team who goes through all of that content before they pass it on to us to be like, yes, it's approved, you can actually use this. So on our end, we're playing our part, we're doing our own role. But for citizens who consume all of these things, they should be sourcing their news from the right channels, not just anybody who posts or tweets or shares information on social media. They should also go on traditional platforms to be sure that they are consuming, that they're getting the right information. Recently, in recent months, we've seen fake news on social media platforms. And when I see some of those tweets, I'm like, I have to double check, to be sure, did this thing happen? What is going on? Because it's a lot, it's so many now. And so I have to go and check, okay, is this media channel also reporting it? Is this other media channel reporting it? To be sure that, okay, maybe Trump said this or Harry said this. So citizens across the world, they need to be careful because they could just take that fake news and run with it. So while media houses are playing their part in ensuring that they are putting out news that is trustworthy and that has gone through various levels of checks, ordinary citizens also play their own part by ensuring that they're consuming the right information.
Thank you very much. Definitely verifying your news source is the number one principle of journalism, because like he aforementioned, you might see something that is happening, let's say an election is happening in Nigeria and someone takes a footage from somewhere and claim that this is happening right now, and this immediately stirs not only a controversy, but it also begins to stir hatred between different traditional groups. We have seen them on social media platforms where people take videos and claim they are from a certain group, have inflicted violence on another group, which could cause, more havoc than good.
Recently, we actually, the recent story about the president of Cameroon, there was social media posts about him being dead in France, but it wasn't true.
Yes.
And a lot of, even I think Reuters took the story and like the president of Cameroon, Paul Biya, is dead. No, it's not. You have to verify. When the minister came out and said, no, he's not dead, and you people should stop this, there was a backlash. People were saying, no, because you're the authority, that's why. But sometimes we have to also know that the authorities are not, they're not there just to lie to us. Authorities will give you what needs to be out there for people, because not every information is true information, right? So in that aspect, for the citizens, when you have your information, if the authority, especially the government, when it comes to government, I'm not saying you should entirely believe everything they say, but when it comes to matter of life and death, matter of national security, I think whatever the government says is what's supposed to be consumed by the layperson. Whatever the social media, what they call them, conspiracy theorists say, you don't take it. because they do it for clickbait. They do it just to get likes on Instagram and on Twitter, and then get retweets, and then it makes them famous. Then they come back after the damage has been done, and then they say, sorry, it's a false, fake news or false. We've seen it even with the war in Gaza, we've seen it. When the war started, the first time the Hamas attacked, they came out with 40 babies being killed, which has never been true. But even legacy media took that story. There is no evidence to show that. However, eventually it's now been proven that no, it never happened. So as an audience, as a person scrolling through your social media feed, make sure you follow verified people. Make sure you, even verified, make mistakes sometimes. Use your intellect. There are some stories that are too good to be true. When it's too good to be true, most probably it's not true.
Exactly. When it's too good to be true, most definitely, or most probably, it's not true. And just adding to that, he said something about, when the media runs away with a misinformation, because it's always sensational and it spreads like wildfire. And before you can have those type of information under control, the damage is already done. Like he mentioned about, what happened in Gaza, the 40 beheaded baby, which, by the way, I think some legacy media houses are still going with in order to, fulfill their, I would say, broadcasting policies. I wouldn't go into too much information about that. I would like to give to Mr.
Yes, I think they have said it all, but to add on what they have said, right now, I think in the media industry, there is a race on who gets the story first. Who first gets to tell the story. And that brought a very fine line on, how do I put this? Very fine line on whether I should first fast-check the story or I should break the story and deal with the drawbacks later. That's where the problem is now. Because something will happen now, in 10 minutes later, and it will be on the internet. So if you're a journalist and you want the viewership, you have to be quick in disseminating your information. Of course, in the legacy media, we all know, as journalists, we have to uphold the truth, right, at all means. So this information is very difficult, especially in the age of AI, where you can manipulate pictures and videos and statements and everything. So it's difficult to manage and solve the problem. But I think two things could curtail the issue. And first thing is education, awareness creation through media literacy. That will be able to solve the problem. Because if you see a picture or you see a post, you should be able to understand whether this post is fake or not. But when we're having the problem in identifying whether it's a fake or not, then consumption becomes imminent because it's difficult to determine whether the story is fake or true. And the other thing is fact-checking organization. Recently, we have been seeing rise in the amount of organizations that are doing fact-checking around the world. And Africa Check is one of them. They brought together over 50 fact-checking organizations in Africa and in different countries in Africa, that if a story happens, they first have to verify, contact the contact person in that country to verify whether the story is correct or not. So these are platforms that we can use to fact-check our stories. I will give you one example that recently happened in Gambia in terms of football. For the past 2.5 years, CAF have banned Gambia Stadium because we don't have the facilities. So all the football games that we play them in abroad. So the Gambia Football Federation, they tried to renovate the stadium, and with the incoming international breaks this month, they were racing to finish before this month. So last month, they finished everything, and then they took pictures and videos and sent it to CAF. Now, based on the videos and the pictures that CAF saw, they said, okay, we are giving you a temporal approval. But then the Football Federation came out and gave a news press conference saying that CAF has approved the stadium. So our next game, which is a home game, was going to be played in Gambia. So everyone picked up the story. Even though they made it clear that CAF is going to send their technical experts to come and verify before they give a final verdict on the approval. But what happened, since they did the press conference, and then they are 100% sure that it's going to be approved, now every media organizations in Gambia and around Africa picked up the story that Gambia Stadium has been approved, and the next game is going to play in the Gambia. And a week later, even State House, the presidency, picked up the story, thanking GFF for the job well done. And a week later, CAF experts came to Gambia, and then they inspected the stadium. Every other facilities was okay, but the pitch was not approved. And CAF rejected the renovation. And now, what happened is that CAF did not approve the stadium. So all those media organizations, including the presidency, has to backtrack, has to eat back what they've said, what they've disseminated to the media. But it's already out there. People have already started making preparation for the games. But it's already there. The damage has already been done. So even if you come back and backtrack and say, okay, what I've said was wrong, but the damage has already been done. If they had fact-checked, they had contacted CAF and asked whether what the GFF said is the case or not, then they would have gotten the clear information on that issue. I think it's a very serious case, and everyone is falling for it these days.
Absolutely. From the story he has just told us, you can definitely understand that getting in front of misinformation is not an absolute possibility. There are times you can get, like he said, there are times you can get in front of it. And also, we have to play our own part in verifying from multiple sources, because in the office, that's what we do first. When you come with a video that could cause an earthquake, my land manager always tells me you have to verify it from at least 3 places. Let's see if it is right or wrong, or if this is true. When was it posted by who? Do we have a location? Who has taken it? And then we would wait and see if we can get credible information, or if we can get credible acknowledgement that this is a video or a photo that is real. So like you said, if this is from a government official, but they are also spreading misinformation, most probably for other reasons. But again, that just makes the whole situation a little bit more complex. Moving on, there is something I think, and this would be my last question, something that I think is very important. Digitalization, yes, is very important in Africa, but a bigger thing is underrepresentation, especially in legacy media or abroad. So, for example, the predicament in Africa is paramount. We know what's happening in our continent. I'm very sure many people are unaware of what's been happening in Mozambique. People have been dying. There have been riots after the election that took place, I think, earlier in October, if I'm not mistaken, when the ruling party has been in power for more than 5 decades, and people want a change. And now people are rioting. And it's a pretty big deal for the country because they're going through a transitional process. But you can't see it being reported mainstream. And when it's being reported, it's underreported. What's happening in South Sudan, in general? Yes, we see pictures. It's as if we open our phones and we see pictures. Okay, so and so amount of people have died in South Sudan. But many people are unaware of why are they fighting? Who is killing who? Why is it not in the media that a whole village is getting obliterated? We've seen the media coverage, and I'm by no way emphasizing what's happening in Gaza, but also in our Africa. We have many journalists, thousands of journalists who are Africans that are not reporting, or that we are not giving that representation the voice that Africa needs. So my question is, why is there underrepresentation, and how can we emancipate from this predicament?
I will take that first. The reason why there is underrepresentation of Africa or about African stories in the legacy media or in the mainstream media is simple. Where power lies, whoever has the power controls the narrative. We have to be realistic. African media is not as top-notch as Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC. So those in control of those legacy media have more authority, have more say in talking about African stories. I commend TRT World for what it's doing by opening TRT Africa, allowing Africans to tell their own story. However, previously, from the BBC and the CNN, apart from now, they've started changing the narrative. Previously, every other African story from the BBC is about killing, malnutrition, kwashoko, flies on the face of Africans suffering from famine, because that's the narrative that sells in their countries, right? So they use that to make money from their people. You can donate to Africa. It's easy to get money from Africa. That being said, our Africans also need to change the narrative. Our Africans also need to portray Africa in good light. I will give an example with Nigeria, the Nollywood film industry. Nollywood is the first encounter of Western person with Nigeria. But the films that we had in Nollywood is all about magic and people disappearing. So what do you expect? What do you think the Westerner will think? Oh, when you go to Nigeria, it's all about ritual, it's about sacrifice and all that. So we need to change our mindset, first of all, and then we need our government, our authorities to also get the power and invest more in the narrative of Africans. TRT Africa is by Turkey. It's produced here in Turkey. Where is TRT Africa style in Nigeria, for example? Where is TRT Africa style in Kenya, in Gambia, in other parts in Cameroon? We don't have it, simply because our government, if I turn on the national TV right now in front of you to watch, you will not stand it for 2 hours, or for 1 hour, for 30 minutes. But here, people invest more to tell their own narrative, to tell their own stories, simply because their audience needs to consume what is the narrative of the government. Similarly, I urge African countries to work towards that, work to achieve that. So it's not just by having talks and then saying, oh, they always portray Africa in bad light. No, what are you Africans doing to portray Africa in a good light? They have the authority, they have the power. Of course, they will concentrate what is more beneficial. It's a beneficial game. What am I going to benefit from this story? If I say Africa is suffering, I can send aid to Africa. I can have soft power over Africa. I can control African leaders. But if I keep saying Africa is glamorous, Africa has all the gold, Africa has all the diamonds, then you can't send aid to Africa. You can't go there. So similarly, we have to change our mindset as Africans as well. We shouldn't be beggars. We shouldn't come to Europe and be seeking for aid. We have what we have. We have our own natural resources that we can come and have an investment and discuss it and sell it to people, not come and beg. So power is the first place where the narrative is being shaped. So right now, Africans don't have that much power in the media. So we have to be frank, but then we have to change the narrative as well. I think that's my take. That's a realistic point of view. I don't know what my colleagues would think about.
To add on what he said, I completely agree with him. There's a saying in African proverb, we say, until the lion learns how to write his story, the story will continue to glorify the hunter.
Yes.
And that's important. We have to tell our own story in our own image. But I think that the tide is, like I always say when I have discussion with my fellow journalists, I think it's high time for Africans to start writing our own stories. Not only writing our own stories, but beating our own drums and singing our own songs. It's high time. Because even if you write your own story, but you cannot beat your own drum, you will not be able to sing your own songs. It's important. How do we do that? Like he said, it's not only limited to journalists. Citizens themselves, Africans themselves, regardless of where you are from, regardless of who you are, we have to portray the positive image of Africa. whether you live in the continent or you live in abroad, we should always portray the good image of Africa. And I've seen that dynamism changing. If you look at the recent transformation in the media landscape, we have seen citizens coming out using social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. And one of the famous influencers is Ward Mayer. We have seen how he came into fame by portraying Africa the way it is, going to several African countries, trying to narrate the story of Africa the way it is, not the way that the Western media wants Africa to be seen, which is a continent embedded in poverty and war, but the way it is. So I will put it this way. The problem why we are under-marginalized, we are under-reported, is three things. The first important thing is infrastructure development. We don't have the infrastructure. Okay, we're talking about digital media, we're talking about digitalization. But if you look at Africa as a continent, according to SMA report in 2022, only 42% of the African adult population is connected to the internet. So over 58% of the population is not connected. So even if you are saying your own story, if the connectivity is not there, then nobody gets it. So that's one problem, one side of the coin. Another thing I would add is the issue of dependence. We are not financially independent. And that creates a lot of issues for African media. Of course, you see a media organization in Tanzania, and if you ask why are you not reporting on Sudan, they will say we don't have resources. And it's true, they don't have the resources. Because most of the media organizations on African continent don't have a very good financial model that would generate revenue for them. And that's a problem. So unless and until we are able to liberate ourselves financially, to be able to tell our own story the way we want it, then we will still be stuck in that mode. And I would recommend two media organizations in Africa, one in Nigeria,
Channels.
Yeah, one in Nigeria and another one in South Africa. The one in South Africa is Daily Maverick. They have a very good financial model where they are able to sustain themselves. So in that way, they are able to do their editorial the way they want it, present Africa the way they want it. But unless and until we bridge that gap, it's going to be difficult. And the third, I think perhaps the most important thing is capacity building and training. African journalists have to be trained on data journalism. We have to be trained on telling African stories, right? And also trained on investigative journalism, because these things are very important. It's not only about going out and going to a program and reporting about the program and reporting about events. We have to start telling our own stories. But to be able to do that, we have to learn how to do that. We have to learn how to tell our own stories. It's not limited to only journalists, but to citizens themselves, because nowadays everyone is using social media. When an event is happening anywhere in the world, someone will just go and film it and post it on the internet. But we have to know, we have to be trained on how to do that responsibly and how to portray the image of Africa. And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your valuable additions.
Okay, they've pretty much said everything, but I just want to say, a few days ago, a colleague of mine from Pakistan, he was handing over, and he was like, "Oh, there's a cricket story. They've not actually done anything about it." I said, "Okay, fine. Cricket, Pakistan, that's fine. We want to make our colleagues happy. We'll run that story." But in the whole of the rundown, there was actually very few stories that had African content. And this is one of the things I try to change when I'm on shift. Maybe we need more Africans, in my department who can consistently push to have more African stories in the rundown, because if we talk about this for hours, it will not change the idea that Western media has, that other regions should take priority over the African continent, which is why the point he made about us owning our own or having control over our own media houses would work better, because Western media would definitely not place priority if it's not negative news. Sudan, for instance, now, the challenge, news could break out of Sudan. Maybe there's been fighting between the Sudanese forces and the RSF, Sudanese army and the RSF, Rapid Support Forces. There'll be not one single picture that will get out of there. It's a challenge. I can't remember the last time we had new videos out of Sudan, actually. It's a huge challenge. So we need maybe more brave journalists in these regions that are covering conflict to be able to send content across. That's one. Two, we need to be able to have platforms that will prioritize African content, because before we will get to stories out of Africa, we have to do Gaza, we have to do Ukraine, we have to do other regions that lots of things are happening in the US election. And then Africa is like at the bottom of the rundown. It's like the very bottom, except if something has happened, breaking news, hundreds of people have died or dozens of people have died, then it moves to the top.
Or there is a coup.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Or there is a coup in Africa, then it comes to the top.
It has to make the headlines.
Yeah.
I remember there was, I think, a few months ago when there were riots not riots actually, protests in Nigeria when Nigerians were angry. I remember how hard I had to push for that story to be published. I wanted it to go out, and I pitched the story in the morning, and the response I got was that, yeah, it's a good story, but it would not really resonate with our audience. I said, screw the audience. My country is in turmoil right now, and I have to say what I have to say, and people need to know exactly what's happening in Nigeria. People need to know what the people want, the voice of the people, what's happening, because one of the primary responsibility of the media is to hold those who are in power accountable. And if we can't do our jobs because a few people wouldn't give us clicks, then we would have to start asking questions about our profession. Also, Mr. Saidy said it all. We have to, encourage young journalists who are venturing into, journalism, aspiring into journalism, to always put at the forefront African studies, African story. People who want to, I don't know any investigative journalism that we're doing. And sometimes when we try to do investigative journalism, then we face other hurdles from our own people. And they've all said it all. I can't add anything else. They've been brilliant with their words. They've crafted it well with their experiences, and shows that, being in the media house, how much importance it has in shaping not only lives, stories that are untold, stories that needs to be told, stories that needs the flashlight to be put on it, because there are so many stories. There are 24 hours in a day in Africa, and every single day something happened, and it needs to be said to the world, not only the bad things, but also what makes Africa great, what glorifies Africa. There are so many things that glorify Africa. And I think that has also, like I said, we have to get out and crack out of that box that we've been put, or we've even contributed to putting ourselves in, and tell Africa as it is, because Africa is beautiful. Africa has wonderful stories. Africa has a lot of places that needs to be seen, and Africa has many, many advantages that can be shared with the world. So I would entertain one or two questions, after which we will call it a day.
Okay, my question is simple. Having listened to what you've said, I want to really ask. First, I will have a base from what you said earlier. You said, think like Africa, beat our own drum and tell our own story. Now, looking at Africa, do you think journalism is failing? in Africa? Do you think journalism is failing in Africa? That's the first one. And then the second one is this. Do you think we should believe in the media when most times we don't get the real information from the media? For one reason or the other, you may say that maybe the heads do not want it to happen. But the people deserve to know the truth, how it is and what is happening, without painting, without addition or subtraction. For example, the last, what happened in Nigeria, Lekki massacre. A lot of people died. And I don't think the media was able to provide with evidence, with clarity, including with journalism, what really happened there. And until today, a lot of people know nothing about what has happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. We'll answer that, then we'll take her, and we have more questions coming.
Let me take the first question.
Yes, please.
About if journalism still exists. Right? That was the question.
He said, is media failing?
Is it
Failing. Okay. When I was starting out in the media industry, I told myself I cannot work for the public sector. I cannot work for a government-owned media organization, because we all know that even till now, there's censorship when it comes to reporting news. Not too long ago, Twitter was banned in Nigeria for months, by the president. So it's very challenging for journalists to be able to say the truth objectively, to give the facts. It's a problem. You can't just, many of the journalists who work back home, they work for government-owned organizations, even the ones that work for the private sector. There's a syndrome called brown envelope. They cannot tell the news if they don't get brown envelope. They cannot report. And because they are poorly paid as well, they're poorly paid in Nigeria, where I come from, they're poorly paid, and it's just a mess completely. So I won't say it's completely fading, but we just need a desperate change. We need to be able to have organizations that can tell the truth as it is, that can give us the accurate information, and the legacy media is there doing what they can do, but they cannot report local stories. They can only focus on the stories that resonate with international audience. So at the end of the day, people have to rely on local media to tell what it is. And then when you can't even rely on them, then how are we going to be able to hold the government accountable for decisions or actions that they're taking? So, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Did I answer your question? So, let me try. So what we need to do, journalism is not failing, or it's not fading in Africa. What we need is a change of mindset. Simply because now it's a global village. The world is a global village. Anybody can create content and put it out there for consumption. YouTube pays you to put more content on YouTube, right? So we need more people to be more brave and then to put out the report as it is. If you remember, just 2-3 days or 4 days ago, there was an attack in Amsterdam, Maccabi Tel Aviv. The boy who reported was a 13-year-old boy with his camera and his microphone. And he debunked, he was the one who showed the truth of what's happening. Even though we have Sky News, Reuters, CNN, BBC given an alternative view, but then we found the truth. So we need mindset change in Africa, especially in places like Nigeria, where people have access to their phone. Everybody has the phone. You can record your story with your phone and put it out there for people to see it. Just make sure it's honest. You might not get millions of naira or millions of dollars by posting that, but eventually the truth is out. So people that have the passion would do what's supposed to be done, while others will not. So in that aspect, sometimes, as she said, some people get squeezed by the government or by the officials. Don't say that, don't say. We have several examples in Nigeria. We have David Hoinda, who is in exile now. He cannot speak about some topics. But when you do that, you have a price to pay, especially in places like Africa. So we need a total mindset change. We need a policy whereby journalists will have a right to report however they see it. If we don't have that, then I don't think so. The policy needs to change. So it's not fading, but we need to have policy change. We can report anything from here about Nigeria, and we don't have any backlash, we don't have any fear. But a Nigerian cannot report the way it is, simply because there are watchdogs waiting for you, gatekeepers who will say, you're not supposed to say that, you're not supposed to say that. So if we don't have that change in policy, if we don't have that journalism right for the journalists in African countries, no, we're not going anywhere. So we have to wait for CNN to come and say Africans are suffering. And then.
Excuse me, I just wanted to comment on that discussion. I don't have a question. I just wanted to comment. Because we have journalists here, commenting. My view on that debate is that we maybe need to sort of shift, to me, the view we have on the content because the content is a product. I would like maybe to see what we are seeing from a business perspective. Mm-hmm. You were saying early on that we need to change the narrative on Africa. And honestly, I am a communicator myself, but I think that we need more business people entering in that sphere. Mm-hmm. Because actually, you were saying that some people used to say a certain narrative about Africa because they have an agenda. So if we have more business people seeing the content as something that can even make money to themselves, first, and second, change the narrative on Africa, maybe we won't be into that, game of, the government want to, try to do this to a journalist. Journalists will be just content provider, but we have business people, because what we see, some big news channels in other regions are owned by business people because they have a certain agenda. And this is what I would like to advocate, for Africa, to have more business people owning some news channel and directing a certain narrative which will be positive for Africa, and won't play that game of hide and seek about, all those politic sort of game. And another thing that I wanted also to add into the debate, to reply to my brother comment, is that we have also to think about other players in this, which are the diaspora. We have the expertise, maybe not in Africa, but outside Africa, but Africans as well, who can do the job really perfectly. And they have the skills, they have the experience. I think those two are a perfect example. And they can do that job as well. So that's my 2 cents.
I agree with what you say. However,
is it profitable?
Is it profitable? That's number one. Number two, most of the channels, especially in Nigeria, are owned by private individuals. But if they say something that the government doesn't like, then they have to pay a fine. So we need to have a change of policy in the government at first, before then we can talk about businesses. Of course, like the advertisement money that goes to CNN from Glo, from Zenith Bank, can be channeled elsewhere, can be channeled to other local companies where they can make better content. And I agree with you in that aspect, but however, they're not going to make much money, they're not going to make much profit if they're still selling it to the local people, because how many people can afford to generate revenue to them? Yeah. However, when they do it in a global aspect, they get more money, they get more reputation, they get more views, more eyes watching. Back to, I think it was Salim Saidy who said, there is no infrastructure. So we don't have enough infrastructure to publish this content to most of Africans. 40% cannot have access. Only 40% have access to internet. So it's true what you said, but then still, we have government officials here, when they go back home, they should try to make sure journalism have their rights to say whatever they want to say. And then that's where we can make Africa better, and then we cannot continue. We cannot continue this cycle of begging. Africans, everywhere we go, African leaders always ask for help. It's not supposed to be that way. we're supposed to produce. We're running like a socialist kind of system in Africa, which is not profitable for the business people and for the government as well. So I agree with what you said about here and here.
I agree with what you said, partially.
I'm very sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off because we have one question from him. I think he was first.
Two of them.
Yeah, he was first.
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is probably based on an observation that I've made.
Can you
microphone?
All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is based on an observation that I've made. First, I have to comment such media outlets and media houses like TRT Africa for bringing what I might say is an impartial and a very reflective and honest situation of the status quo on the ground, right? But I've also made an observation that probably your coverage is mainly based or maybe focused or biased towards the political arena, especially events that do happen on the political front mostly. I'm not sure probably that is what brings in the numbers or maybe the views. But I also feel that given the advantage that you have, probably you are underreporting on the areas of business itself, the opportunities that Africa does have, bringing in a fresh view, especially on the business side, the opportunities that Africa does have, right? As well as maybe bringing to the fore or maybe to the front the opportunities that Africans can also get to have abroad, given the wide coverage that you guys have. I believe investment or maybe bringing information about investments to people, that message resonates well even with the ordinary citizen who may know that, okay, if I do produce tomatoes, maybe there's a big market for tomatoes in Turkey, right? Or maybe in a certain country, right? But they cannot probably get that information maybe from the national broadcaster in their own country, right? I believe because of unemployment, because of high levels of unemployment in African countries, if you bring such a fresh perspective and a fresh angle in covering such, I believe it will be able to bring a very huge viewership as well as very apparent and positive results from the digitalization phase that is. So in that regard, I believe it would also be to the advantage of not only the Africans, but even everyone else, whereby a symbiotic relationship will be created. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have you been watching TRT recently?
Pardon?
Have you been watching our program recently?
Yes, I've been watching some of them.
So if you go to YouTube and search Africa Matters TRT World, you'll find exactly what you're saying. Because I'm the program editor of that specific program, and my only point, my only view, except if there are, like, of course, we have to be honest, we have to be fair as well. Africa is not all good. There are other stories that are really not good. Like there are people being killed in Congo and all that place. We also show that. But half of the show is showing African businesses and African tech and entrepreneurs globally. So if you go there, you will notice that we don't just do politics. We hardly touch politics on African matters. Hardly. We don't go into that territory. But we talk about young entrepreneurs, young investment, young businesses, and even on the Money Talks program that is actually about business, global business, I push African stories every week. I make sure we have an African topic talking about African cocoa business, cocoa in Cameroon, cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, petrol in Nigeria, and other tech startups in South Africa, shoes and all that. So we try to push that narrative. I don't shy away from doing that. What I don't do is show negative aspects all the time. I try to avoid that simply because it's not all negative, but also it's not all positive. There are some stories that are not really good, not even for Africans, not even for the world in general. So if you tune into TRT Africa Matters, you will see what you're saying there right now on YouTube. You can just Google it and see. You will see all those things you're talking about.
So
you very much.
that is a plug.
See
A shameless plug for Africa Matters. So definitely tune in. We have excellent producers like himself, and
Yeah,
also
just tune in. You'll see
tune
all
into
of them.
TRT World, and you see Africa Matters. Last question of the day, please.
Thank you very much.
After that.
I don't have a question. I want to contribute to the debate. And if you allow me, I think the last question, how do we tell the story of Africa? I think one way of telling the story of Africa is to have African broadcasters telling the story to other broadcasters. By that I mean to say, let's create a network where broadcasters from different countries can share their content. I used to be the editor-in-chief of the national broadcaster in Zimbabwe. We experimented with Namibia Broadcasting Corporation. What we'll do is every day in the morning, after we've done the diary is the lineup of stories for the day. I would send it to Namibia, they would send their own to me, and I would say, okay, on your stories, can you give me those 4 stories when they are done? And they will also get some from us. What that did was, for once, the story of Namibia was told by Namibians to Zimbabweans, not CNN, not BBC. Wow. And that will make citizens have more faith in their own media. If they want to know the story of Uganda, the story of Congo, they know that we can get it at home. We don't have to wait for BBC or CNN. So I think content sharing is critical. And I've been talking to brothers and sisters here saying, please, can I have contacts of your national broadcasters? I'm now here in Turkey, I'm a student, I'm a media student like him. And I was saying, one of the things that I want to achieve, which I couldn't do when I was a journalist in Zimbabwe, is to try and bring everyone together and say, look, we lose nothing. Let's just share the story of Africa, rather than to wait for BBC and CNN. So that's one thing that I want to say. Then you talked about misinformation. I agree with everything that you said. But I was thinking that, do you realize that our ministries of information are not doing their job? I think this is the critical time now, when you have an avalanche of stories, some which are not only negative but false. It is time for the ministries of information to be right on their toes, even if it means they should create departments that deal specifically with social media. Lucky for me, my last year in Zimbabwe, I was working for the Ministry of Information, and we were struggling to tell the story of Zimbabwe because we would follow social media. Once the wrong story is out, we then try to tell it correctly. So I think it's time to change the focus. The Ministry of Information should not only be there to tell what government wants to say, but it should be there to run with stories of the nation. That way, people will then say, if you want to know the truth of what has happened, go to the handle of the Ministry of Information. You will know the story. Then lastly, pardon me, one area of concern for me with digitalization is away from what you were discussing. It's cultural imperialism. As a student, I'm interested in Africa, culture, and languages. And the opening up allows so much information, which is very good. But at the same time, there is a danger that we will drown. By this, I mean to say, I'm trying to see, my brother from Burkina Faso, we were talking yesterday, and I was saying to him, what language do you use in your country? English, French. What language do I use in my country? English. But what of the indigenous languages? So with this opening up, we have the danger that the indigenous languages, which carry our culture, which carry our identity, which carry our identification of who we are, which carry our history, will eventually be wiped out. I don't know if there's anyone from Mozambique, but if I'm correct, in Mozambique, there are parts where children now regard Portuguese as their mother country, their mother language, which means indigenous languages are slowly going away. English is not a language, it's a culture, it's a way of doing things. As I'm standing here, I'm being English. Maybe if I was going to be what I should be in my own country, maybe I'll be acting differently. So there's a danger that if we're not careful with the content that we're producing, we'll end up losing who we are and become who we are not. So as we look at all this, let's also ask ourselves, what content should we be pumping out as a counter to what our people are receiving? And that content is easy. It's Pan-African, Afrocentric content, which we should share to each other. It doesn't matter what we receive from elsewhere, but as long as one can compare and say, oh, this is what people do in Uganda, this is what people do in Namibia, this is what people do in America, then you are able to say to yourselves, oh, this is us, this is them. But where you then have content that says, who are we end up believing that what we are getting from out there is who we are, when we are not that. So the issue of cultural imperialism, to me, is a big deal. And I hope one day I'll be able to write a book about that. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. If you're following TRT also, I'm going to still continue the reclam. If you're following TRT, I don't know if you're listening. It's not listening.
Sir?
If you follow TRT, you will see we have TRT Hausa, TRT Swahili, which produce content in the local languages of people of that same place. So if you're from Kenya, I know you speak, Kenyans most speak Swahili, they have a content in their own mother tongue. So we have to commend initiative like that from TRT and from people like where they produce the content in people's local language for them to understand what people are saying, what the story is all about. So it's true what you said. When you speak in English, you don't pass the message the way it's supposed to be. However, we have broadcasters like TRT who's trying to produce the content to the local people, which is true. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you very much. And final question from Her Excellency,
no, it's
Minister.
Just an observation. People talked, and most of the points have been touched. But I want to observe that we need to maintain standards. Not everyone can be a journalist. Journalism seems to be taken simply. Anybody can be a reporter, anybody can be an editor, which is not true. Whereas for someone to be an agriculturist, their qualifications she must attain, even at recruitment, those very qualifications are a must-have. But what I have observed, anyone can rise up, and because he writes or talks louder and thinks he can be a good journalist. And in so doing, mostly the private sector has not recruited quality journalists. They say what they wish, and the proprietors of those media houses don't do anything, even where there are defamatory stories. They run on media, they are in paper media, and the corrections are not made, nor the culprits punished. Whereas we wish the journalists have their rights, but they don't have rights to say anything they wish to say. In some media houses, they are battlegrounds. How can I, a seasoned journalist, moderate a story where someone is openly abusing, falsely accusing another? And we as African countries, we have also fallen victim of that, where they are competing companies. A company will undermine the product of another company of another country. These things are happening. So as Africa, we should patch up ourselves, walk the talk, and make sure we have set media acts that must be followed, so that we start by having quality people who know their code of conduct, who know their conditions of service, and as governments, we give them the rights. We don't get obsessed on reporting on us the failures on our side. So we need balanced stories. We need to enhance and orchestrate the positive stories of change so that they can motivate us, expose us to one another, and finally we are at the same footing. The rest were talked. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your observation. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been very wonderful having you here and having our journalists, my colleagues in the field to, I wouldn't call it like a panel, it's more of a discussion to speak about a common problem, a problem we all experience at the very personal level. And I hope both panels actually have been valuable to you and also worth your time being here with us up until this hour. I would like to thank also our journalists who took time out of their schedule to be here with us at this hour. Please, a huge round of applause for them and also for yourself. We are now at the end of today's program, AFEX 2024, and we will be closing. You're now free to... I've held you guys, everybody, for too long. Thank you all for participating in all the event, and I wish you a good rest. We will converge tomorrow.